In this video, we'll begin by defining sexual orientation and gender identity, and then briefly discuss some of the theories behind sexual orientation. So these are some terms, and please keep in mind as you watch this video that these terms change over time, and I'll try to update them as possible, but this may still be out there even if I have updated it. For now, when we define gender identity, we're referring to how we identify sexually and what we call ourselves. Now, most people have a gender identity that matches their external appearance, but some people have a gender identity that is opposite their biological sex. So psychologists and biologists and researchers once believed that gender identity was learned and more of a product of rearing and experience. Current evidence, though, strongly suggests biological factors, especially prenatal hormones and epigenetics, play a large role in gender identity. So some other terms to clarify is when we're talking about sex differences for this class, we're going to be talking about biological differences. Now, while it's not as straightforward as there are biological males and biological females, that's the way we have to make it simple in here so that we can discuss these things. We have to break it down in some way. So just keep in mind, though, when we talk about biological females, we're saying people with an XX chromosomal pattern, and biological males, people with an XY chromosomal pattern. Because on the Y chromosome in particular, there are genes, and some on the X chromosome too, that determine biological differences. Now, please keep in mind that it's not as straightforward as this, because there are exceptions and there are abnormalities. So sometimes there are people with 3X chromosomes or an XXY chromosomal pattern. So there's differences. Sometimes the gene on the Y chromosome translocates to the X chromosome. And so there are no real straight, clear-cut differences, but for this purpose, we're going to talk about biological women being XX chromosomal pattern, biological men being XY chromosomal pattern. And then we also want to discuss what we talk about when we say gender differences. So again, in here, this is what results from people's thoughts about themselves as male or female. How does an individual identify? Do they identify themselves as more masculine or more feminine, or just somewhere in between? And here's an acronym we're probably most familiar with now today, but LGBTQIA+. And so just to go through what some of these terms mean, and again, they can change over time, but as I'm recording this video, the L stands for lesbian, which are women who are attracted to other women. Gay used to be an umbrella term for people who are attracted to someone of the same gender, but it more commonly refers to men that are attracted to men. The B stands for bisexual, which are people who are attracted to both men and women. T stands for transgender, and this refers to anyone who doesn't identify with the gender they were assigned at birth. Queer is typically an umbrella term for everyone in this acronym. It's all-encompassing and sometimes also refers to questioning with the Q. The I is for intersex conditions, and these are individuals that have ambiguous genitalia and or both male and female chromosomes, as we discussed earlier. A is for asexual, people who don't feel sexual attraction. They may still have romantic relationships and engage in sexual activities, but they don't feel that sexual attraction. And plus is for everyone else, and there's so many things that we can't all include or is all encompassing, but things like two-spirit or non-binary, pansexual, aromantic, gender fluid, agender, so many terms out there. But just to keep in mind, this is kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about sexual orientation. So the question I'm sure you're all asking is, well, what does account for differences in sexual orientation? Now, my psychobiology text goes through a number of different theories, talking about how there's behavioral and anatomical differences, there are genetics, there's evolutionary reasons, prenatal influences, brain anatomy, and while a lot of these have been discounted, we haven't found a specific gene, although we do suspect that epigenetics may be involved. That's not a specific gene or any type of mutation in a gene. The evolutionary reasons are not logical to me, at least. The prenatal influences them and the brain anatomy are the ones that make the most sense in terms of the neuroscience. Things can happen prenatally in the womb, epigenetic changes in particular, exposures to certain hormones or a lack of exposure to certain hormones that can then result in alterations in brain anatomy. So linked on the Canvas page, there'll be a video that talks about epigenetics and the some of the research that's done looking at epigenetic changes in sexual orientation. And so transgender individuals, these individuals appear to have some sort of differences in the connectivity in their brain. And so typically it looks as if, at least what research is showing today, is the brain activity and the structure resembles pattern in the desired gender. So again, what causes these changes? Is it hormones? Is it epigenetics? That still remains to be seen, but that again, we understand today that these changes really are more biological and not something that's learned behavior. And there's still a lot of research to be done in these areas.